in this project, and we are responsible for collecting information for updating the methodology, organize webinars and workshops. As you know that over the past 2.5 years, we have organized 5 webinars which covered the key aspects of existing FOT methodology. And today's topic is about data sharing in FOT-related activities. And the speaker is Dr. Helena Gallerman at SAFER, who actually did one of the previous webinars. As you know very well, data sharing, it is a formidable complex and involving process, which involves a lot of stakeholders, procedures, facing a lot of barriers. I hope that Helena is going to shed some light on it today. Helena have been a project manager for various national and European FOT and DS activities since 2007, and in the previous FOT support action, Helena led the working group on data sharing, and in this project, she has been leading this work, continues the investigation. Before her presentation, for those who didn't attend the previous webinars, I would like to give you a quick run-through of the basic information of this project as a background material, such as the project objectives and main activities. Of course, I'm sorry for those who had heard my introduction before. As you can see on the screen, this 3-year project is a continuation of FONET data activities with a special focus on data sharing and reuse support. The main objectives of this action are to support sharing and reuse of FOT data sets created in the previous project. As you know that we could discover new valuable information from the collected data, or we may be able to address new research questions without really carrying out expensive data collection. This project has been developing a systematic framework for sharing and reuse collected data, and it has been building a detailed catalog of available data tools needed for accessing the database systems, processing the required information. It has been continuing to be an international network for informing FOT activities, sharing lessons learned, and promoting cross-border collaborations, especially from with the USA. To achieve this quite ambitious aims, the project is structured in 6 work packages as shown in this table, and the webinars are tasked in work package 5. This project is coordinated by VTT with contributions from 7 other partners, as you can see the names on the screen, plus more than 20 associated partners. The work package 5, which the webinars belong to, aims to enhance and update FOT methodology with new information about data sharing and reuse, transfer knowledge of the methodology, and provide hands-on experience of data usage. These are organized in 3 main tasks, namely, update of the FAST handbook, knowledge transfer of FOT methodology via webinars, and exploitation of methodology by doing the workshops and so on. Just to give you an overview of what webinars we have been organizing. 6 webinars are designed in this work package, and each of them targets a specific part of the methodology. Although the first 5 targets the people who are relatively new to the methodology or want to become familiar with the methodology, it is a good platform to share information and between the newcomers and also experienced users. So today we focus on how to enable the data sharing process. All the materials covered in these webinars will be transferred into sort of e-learning modules and will be uploaded, or some of them already uploaded to our project website for those who couldn't make it or who wanted to revisit the materials. I think that's all I would like to say. I would like to mention that if you wanted to, if you are interested in this project, want to explore the cooperation opportunities, and please contact us via different channels. We are more than happy to provide information that you may need in terms of FOT methodology. So, Davida, can you transfer the screen to Helena?
Yes. Elena, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, we see you and your presentation, Elena. You can go on.
Okay. Okay, hi, my name is Helena Gellerman, and thank you very much for the kind introduction. Hi, Bob. What I will present for you today is how to enable a successful data sharing and reuse process. And the thing is that I've been active in FOTs and naturalistic driving studies since 2007. And back then, there was not much talk about data sharing, not even reuse of the data within the own organization after the project. The focus was totally on the project at hand. And I would say it was at the end of Euro FOT, at least in Europe, that we started to think about how can we reuse this massive amount of data. And over the years then, since 2012, the data sharing interest has enhanced immensely, because now we see that there are more and more data sets out there, and people are starting to be aware of what you can do, that you can actually reuse the data afterwards, and there are many data sets that can answer new research questions. So therefore, we started this project Fortnet Data to focus on data sharing. So what I would talk about is how does FESTA relate to data sharing? How does data sharing come into the FESTA project? And you can say that it comes in everywhere. We have went through the FESTA V and the FESTA handbook, and we saw that in all the chapters, data sharing is affecting the content. If you look at, for instance, in the preparing stage, you have the way that the kind of data that you will collect, all the decisions around that. Will you collect more data than what you actually need in the project just to have a good reuse of the data? You have the tools, of course, the loggers and analysis tools. And you also have the data structure. Do you want to have it, should you have it centrally in the project, or should you have it distributed? That is also something that affects the data sharing. When we go down to the bottom where you see the using, that of course, how the data is collected. It affects the data quality, it affects the amount of data, which everyone who have done an FOT or an NDS knows that there is always a lot of issues that has to be solved. And also, when you choose your test sites, you have to be aware that there are different national legal restrictions on the data. So that is also something that you have to take into account. And finally, when you go to the right-hand side, you look at analyzing. And I would say one of the most important things here is that affects data sharing is if the data becomes documented properly. You, of course, when you do that, when you process the data, that you keep or enhance the data quality. And also, of course, if you look at the right-hand side, what I'm talking about when it comes to data sharing, it could be used within the project or after the project. So data sharing is very much, and data access, if you have access to the whole data set or part of the data set, affects very much how you can do the research part on the right-hand side of FESTA. So data sharing affects the whole FESTA V, but there are some main areas, and that's where we are going to focus today. Looking at the last slide, it is actually around the bottom where you look at the tools and what data you should collect and how you collect it, and the data documentation. That is what you do within the FOT. But the thing is that there are, if you remember the slide that Haibo showed, that we've had quite a few webinars, and all of them are concerned about things that are done in the project. But when it comes to data sharing, you have to do things before the project starts, and you also have to prepare for the life after the project. And therefore, before the project, it is the agreements that are so essential, where you look at who will own the data and who will get data access. And after the project, you have to, within the project, you have to decide on the financial models and also what kind of support and research services and what kind of data can you provide after the project. When doing this, I actually thought about this as the Mickey Mouse Festavi. And I think that is a way to remember it, with the big ears before the project, and also big ears afterwards. What do they that are after the project want from this collected data set? So for you to remember it, data sharing is somewhat different from the other webinars. It's looking at the Mickey Mouse Festavi. Okay, so when it comes to the project, as I said, there are many decisions that affects the final data set in the project. But for this webinar, a precondition is that we actually have a data set, so that we want to share, and we want people to reuse it. So I won't focus on all the decisions that you take to get the actual data set. And I want to point out that the content in this webinar is applicable in the project if you collect data in different sites, and how do you share that data. And it's of course applicable after the project, how you share the data with anyone, with third parties. And finally, it's actually also applicable in other domains, because those 7 topics that we are going to talk about are applicable regardless of what kind of data set you have. But before I go into the 7 topics, I want to point out the importance of the participant. I think we cannot stress that enough. The participant is the core of the FOT and NDS. If you don't have participants, you don't have any data. You have to take really care about it and think about all the things that person is providing to help you with your research. The person is actually joining mainly to help society, and is actually inviting us to follow that person in the vehicle or on bikes and so on in their everyday life. So I really want to stress that we should value our participants and really treat the data and the privacy with respect. And that is one thing that kind of goes through the whole way of how we protect the data. So coming down then to the data sharing framework, which is something that we developed during 2 Fortnet projects, but mainly in this new one. It consists of 7 topics, and one thing that I talked earlier about, that I've been working with this for 10 years, and in the beginning there were not much talk about data sharing and how to bring that into all the project documents. But now there is, and due to that, quite a few data sets that we collected are actually not able to be shared because the original project documents don't allow that. And it's too complicated to go back to all the partners or go back to all the participants to allow data to be shared. So we will talk about that, and we will talk about, you can say that that is something that is very important before the project. And also if you go to the 2 subjects in the bottom, it's data metadata descriptions and data protection recommendations. And that is also something that is very much connected to the actual project that collects data. When it comes to that, you will start sharing the data. It's important with how do you perform training to make people aware of data protection and how they can use the data. It is also important how you apply for the project or the data. And you also, in all data sharing and data reuse, you will always need support. It's nothing that you can just give. You get a data set and you can start working with it. There will always come up questions. So it is important to think about what kind of support and research services can you provide or do you ask for when you reuse data. Also, the final one on this slide is the financial models. And there are many different things that needs to be financed, and I will go through that. And it's also very important, especially if you have a very large data set that costs a lot of storage and those related costs. Okay, so we will start with the data sharing in general documents. And here we have identified 4 different documents. One is the grant agreement, which is the agreement with the funding project, with the entity that is funding the project. And in some projects you are financing it on your own, but in most projects, at least the larger ones, you have an external funder. And it's very important what you write in that grant agreement that could affect the data share. Maybe the most important one is the consortium agreement. It's an agreement among the partners in the project that collects the data, and there you actually set the possibility to share the data both within the project and also after the project. You have the participant agreement, and I think that many of the participants agreement earlier did not really take this into account. It is now that you start to put in, since maybe 6 or 7 years ago, that you start to put in that you and make the participant agree that you will be able to share the data. So we will look into that. And maybe the most neglected agreement is the one with the external data provider. Here the agreement is with a map provider or a weather provider. It could also be an external sensor with a supplier that supplies you with an external sensor. And here it's very easy to focus on the project. What do we need for the project? And you don't think about, when you write the agreement, that you actually need to have the data also after the project, because you need the attributes, for instance, in the map data when you are going to reuse the data. And if I go one step down when it comes to and detail it a bit when it comes to the project documents. If we start with the grant agreement, it's important to take into account if you should have any requirements on data sharing after the project. That could be that the funder is pushing it, that if we are funding all this data, we also want it to be available after the project. And what can you actually what can you promise that you can share? Because here all the legal restrictions and ethical issues of personal data, for instance, comes in. You also have something that is very good to bring up when you are doing the first agreement, the grant agreement, is to bring up the data sharing for funding the data afterwards. It's very easy for somebody funding a project to say, yes, you're going to have it available after the project. But who is going to pay for that? That affects very much the financial models that I will talk about later. But it's a very good thing if we could to bring it up at the start. So there could be a mutual responsibility to finance it. The second one was the consortium agreement. And as I said previously, it is a very important agreement when it comes to ability to share the data afterwards. You have the ownership and access to data and to data tools, such as the analysis tools and data algorithms and so on. You also have how can you store the data, how can you download the data, how can you access it. Can you go to a specific facility, or can you do remote access, or can you get your own data set? What is the areas of use? Is it for research only, or can anybody use it? Could it be for commercial use as well? And it's also important that in the consortium agreement, the one discussed the post-project reuse of data, so that everyone in the project, for instance, in large European projects, that might be 30 partners, and it's almost not doable to go back to discuss the reuse of data afterwards. So it's important to bring that up at the beginning. And of course, the post-project financing. If you can't agree on something in the grant agreement, you have to at least have something in there in the consortium agreement that this has to be solved during the project. So I just put, there is a lot of things during all of these headlines, and just to give you a flavor of it, when it comes to storage and download of data, there are many different questions that had to be answered. If it's going to be stored centrally or distributed, depending on the data, what kind of data protection is needed, and so on. All of this you can find in the data sharing framework, where we go into all of these different headlines and help you in identifying the issues. Maybe not all have to be answered in your project, but at least you have a checklist to go by. And when it comes to the third part, when it comes to agreement, it's the participant agreement. And it's important that the participant agree to that the data can be reused after the project. That is the main question that needs to go in there. And I also talked about the external data provider agreement. And here it is important to discuss that if the agreement might be with one partner in the project, what about the other partners? Can they access the data freely that has to go into the agreement? Will the data be available after the project? And are there special conditions for use and reuse of data? That is something that has to be in the original agreement, because it's very hard to go back to a supplier after the project when they think that this is over, and even after they supplied the sensor and got the money to go back and say, well, we want this as well. It's really hard to go that way. So think about these questions as well in the external data provider agreement. Okay, that was the parts on project documents. Another very vital part when it comes to data sharing is, of course, the data. The data validity. If you can't trust the data, it's very hard to do research. I mean, you don't know, if you don't know the background of the data, how can you say that your results are valid? In some way, you have to be confirmed, you have to be able to confirm or reassure that that there is a very high data validity, or at least you should know about the flaws in the data. Therefore, it's important that you have a lot of metadata with your data. And it could be on different levels. On a higher level, you need to know the experimental protocol. You have to know how did the participant selection go through, and which one did you actually get at the end. You need to know the video annotation codebook, and that is all on like how the project was set up. When we come down to the actual data, it is important to know how it was generated, what kind of sensor, was it derived from another raw signal, so to speak, and what other properties does it have, like the resolution, frequency, resampling strategies, etc. Another level of data and metadata is the data access principles for tools. If you have your own, is it possible to use the tool that is provided by the project, or do you have to access the data and use your own tools to work with the data? Then you need to know how is the data structured, how do you access the data, and also you need to know about the data format. And we have put a lot of effort into this because we think this is one of the crucial parts, and therefore we have developed like a structure for the data. And as you can see, the data is in the middle. Is the actual data. What kind of data is it? Is it data collected in the project? Is it things that you have enhanced the data with. Is it where is it collected? Is it collected in the what is it data that is collected from the core, that kind of data, or is it questionnaires and so on? So it's the specific data that you have. If we go upwards in the model, you have the descriptive metadata, where you actually describe the different data parts. And here you can see how it was collected or calculated. You have a list of measures and their characteristics, and you also talk about the performance indicators and definitions. So, for instance, what I brought up earlier, like the frequency, how it was calculated, and so on. And then on the step above that, you talk about the study design and the execution documentation. And you need to know why the data set was collected and how it was done, and what kind of it is very good to know what the research questions and so on and the experimental plan was, to be able to know the background to the collection of data. So the top ones actually describe the actual data. When we go further down below data, we talk about the structural metadata, and that talks about how the data is organized. If it's distributed or centrally stored, how the database is structured, and what kind of format is the data stored in. And finally, at the bottom, we have the administrative metadata. How can you access the data, and how is it maintained? Who is responsible for the metadata, both during the project, but also after the project. So this gives an overview of the different things that needs to be documented. And if any one of you have reused the data, you know you will always come up with questions about how about the data itself, or about things about the project. So this is a very important thing, and that's why we wanted to stress it, to put it in one of the first slides. Another one is data protection. Data protection is the actual key to create a trust between the data provider and the reuser. And it is important that that this is set early in the project, and also that you know how it will be done after the project. The two key data sets that needs protection is the personal integrity data, and that is probably the one that has the most focus, because you have a lot of national laws that affects this. But the laws also talk about the intellectual property rights, the IPR data. For instance, most of the projects collect data from sensors or from within the internal data communication in vehicles. And there might be a ownership division, so that you have to know how you need to protect that ownership. The data protection that we have developed includes both backup and recovery policies. The access methods could be on different levels, and that also implies that you can have different, that you need different levels of data protection. On the highest level, if you say that you have data that you can give to public access, then it's anonymized. There's no IPRA issues, and actually you don't need any data protection. then you have an easy data set that anybody can download from a website. You can always have one step down where you need to know who is actually accessing the data. So you can have a conditioned public download where it could be a bilateral agreement, or at least that the person downloading it has to say to identify him or herself. But when it comes to more personal, for instance, when it comes to the personal data, we are talking about a whole different kind of protection. And as long as right now we're working very hard on anonymization and see if you can anonymize video, because video is one of the new things that came into when we started into the picture when we started these FOTs. And here you have to protect the data, and maybe the data have to be, the videos either have to be anonymized so that you can download it, but in the research you usually need the different details in the video, and therefore you can't anonymize it. So then there is two different ways of dealing with this. Either you can set up a remote access where you keep the data in a secure place, but people can log into the data and deal with it, but they can never download it to their own site. Or you can have that you have to go to a specific place and work with the data and work with the video. The data set could be two different parts. I mean, some part could be open for public access, and other parts could be more secure that you have to go there. So it's not one data set have just one of these categories. I will show you in the next slides some of the, give you a flavor of the requirements that we have developed. If you are a data provider, in the sense that you have remote access and you need to really protect it, and in that case you also have requirements on an analysis sites that is tapping into the data from a remote access. All of this is in the FESTA handbook, and it gives you recommendations what you can do, and it also gives you implementation guidelines on the different requirements that I will show you now. So I won't go into all of this. It's just to give you a flavor of the data protection that is needed in a data center and things that you have to think about if you want to protect data. And this is applicable also within the project if you have data sharing inside the project. And I'll just bring up one that is important, that if you have it centrally, if you only have the data in one place, you have to store it and handle it so that you protect it from accidental deletion and corruption. That goes for all projects, but it's very essential, for instance, after the project, where you might only have money to store the data for in one place. This goes for the data center, and for the analysis sites that, for instance, want to remotely use the data. You have to, there are requirements on the analysis workstations that they must be physically and logically protected so that you can't download the data and make screenshots and so on. So you have to have a procedure that prevents that. So this gives you a flavor, and you will find much more in the FESTA handbook and in the data sharing framework about this. And then about the training. Here you have to, both in the project and after the project, it's important that all personnel that handle data, that they are informed and get training about this. It's about they have to know about the local implementation of the security precautions, but they also have to know more about the personal data and the personal integrity. So we have put up recommendations that when you set up a training, the content should be on these 4 different levels. And of course you have to identify who and who should get the training and when. And also, maybe more importantly, what should be included in the training. And of course the data, you have to explain what kind of data and especially focus on the personal data. You have to talk about the applicable laws and the regulations, the content of the consent forms, so that the user get a flavor of what has the participant consent to. The data handling procedure, how do you get access, what are the precautions, the data protections, and so on. And also you need to know about the publication rights. What can you publicize and what is restricted. There is also some recommendations on how you can do this, and finally also how do you document the training, because it's important to keep track of which personnel have been training, and we recommend also that they sign some kind of paper that they, because by the signature you kind of make more focus that this is important. So we recommend to have some kind of document that they sign. When you set up to share the data, you need to think about what kind of support and research services do you need when you reuse the data. It's 2 different categories, because the support services is more like something that you need to provide more or less for the data, for the reuser to be able to use the data. It is of course information and data provision about what kind of data it is and how can you access it and so on. It is also about what kind of tools can you give to the reuser or make them use. It could be the actual analysis tool that you're using in the project. Could be that you only give a viewing tool, or you can say that maybe you didn't develop any tools in the project, so the reuser have to use their own tools. So they need to know how do they use these tools with this data. It could also be that you assist them a little bit in their research needs. So you go through maybe and see if the data is good for these research questions and so on, but that is on a very high level. And finally, you have to go through the data protection and what is needed, and also talk about the analysis facilities. Not if you have data that is open, but if you have data that needs protection. This is a very important point. When it comes to research services, it's more like the research, the reuser pay you for research in comparison with the support, where the analysts do all the reuser do all the analysis. And here you can get very in-depth research advice. You can do research, what kind of data set could be applicable for this data set, or you can develop tools to be able to use the data. And you can also make the reuser say, they come to you and say, okay, we want you to do this research for us. We're interested in these research questions. Please do the whole research and come back to us with a result. So there are very many levels of the research services. We also have the financial models. And after the project, you need to think about this very carefully. If you have a small data set, you probably don't need so much to pay for the cost for storing it. It could be more for the personnel who will work with the reuser to make them access the data, maybe do something with the data before it's handed out, and so on. But this list kind of looks more into these large data sets where you actually need to store an immense amount of data after the project, and how can you actually be able to finance that? Because it's important, if you want to share the data, it's important that you can keep the data up and running. If you need to store it away, it takes a lot of effort to bring it back up. And so it's important that you think about these financial models before you end the project, and preferably already in the grant agreement, as I talked about earlier. Anyway, the items that need funding is, of course, the management and the coordination of the infrastructure. Maybe the main part is, well, one part is the analysis platform support. And because you need to have personnel that can help those that want to reuse it, and you also need personnel who takes care of the data, that stores the data and that kind of man hours. You also probably need tool support. Maybe you need to develop further the analysis tools to be able to respond to new research requests and so on. You need also, for the facilities and analysis workstations, to provide a secure workspace. You need it for the IT operations, for the database service, the storage and licenses and so on. And you might also need to fund data documentation. Hopefully the original project have documented all the project or all the data, but I would say that is not the case in any projects that I've seen. So you might need to do some extra post-project cleanup and structuring of the data. So these are the items. Maybe not all are applicable to your project, but you have to take them into consideration. And how do you actually finance this then? There are 4 different ways that you can finance it. And one is per project. Is a very insecure funding because you don't know how many projects will reuse the data, and you will probably have gaps. You have one project here, one project later on, and who will fund the data in between. Therefore, it's more secure to go with a base funding and per project, so you kind of have a base funding that takes care of the actual having the data up and going, and then the projects can pay for any services that they need for that specific project. There is also another one that you can have a base funding for specific purposes, and you see it very much in accident data research, where a group of members goes together and pay a fee to be able to fund the data that is there, but also maybe continue to collect data. And this kind of usually more applicable to very large volumes of data. And finally, the 4th one is consulting, where you actually could put the cost of the data into the research contract. But that is also very insecure because you don't know how many research contracts you will have. These 4 different models are detailed in the FESTA handbook, and down to 8 different financial models that you can read more about. So at last, we're talking about the application procedure, and it's important that you document that within the project. You should talk about the conditions for reusing the data, and also you should develop a whole application procedure. And the content of that procedure you can see on the right-hand side of the slide. And I'm just going to bring up a few. You can read it afterwards. But who can approve an application? What is the response times and so on? That is really important that you have decided upon that. And also, what are the conditions for access and use of data, and what are the potential costs? Because if you have done this procedure, it's much easier for the applicant to think ahead and think about how much time this would take to apply for the data, and also for the potential costs that they might reserve in their project. This is really important because we've seen cases where this has not been thought of, so there's no money to pay for data, or the application for data takes so much time that the project is almost over when the data comes in. So finally, I just want to bring up some main challenges that we have seen when it comes to data sharing. On the global level, you have different ownership of data, and it reflects the project funding schemes. Who owns the data, and are they willing to provide the data? When you collect data, you have different legal settings that affects how you can share the data. It is very crucial, as I have mentioned before, the data documentation procedures, and that you reinforce data protection. People forget so easily that now I have my data set and I go away with it. And also that you have a sustainable funding for data. And at last, I want to bring up maybe the main challenges. It is to persuade the data owners to share the data. So with this, I conclude the presentation, and I'll leave it over to Heibo.
Okay, thank you very much, Helena. It has been a wonderful time to listen to you.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. Let's do some. There's a few minutes left. See whether we can address a few interesting questions. Have we got anything from the audience? Well, first of all, Helena, while we're waiting for the questions to come in, the last bit you said that persuade data owners to share their data. Who are the data owners? Are they the funding, let's say the research projects, are they the funding bodies like, for example, in the UK, would it be research councils, Highways England, Department for Transport, or the project's partners who collected the data?
Yes, that is a very important question. Because that affects very much how the data can be shared afterwards. It is about the data ownership, and it also is connected very much to the project funding schemes. Like if we look at, for instance, the US, many of the large FOTs are paid by the government, and they are 100% paid, and therefore they have a very large say of how they own the data and how it should be reused afterwards. Looking at the European context, it's usually a division of the cost for the project, and the ownership goes with the partners in the project and the consortium agreement, how you decide to divide the ownership. And that gives a much scattered ownership picture. And therefore, it's more important to decide who owns the data and how we should provide it.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned the data sharing provided by DOT, the US DOT. Yes, I'm aware of this framework which is called the RDE, Research Data Exchange, which I find is extremely interesting and useful. based on what you said, we don't have the European version of that. Is that fair to say, or we are on the way towards that?
Yes, we're working very much on that right now. In the project, we have a data catalog, which is the first part. We have different catalogs, I should say. We have the FOT catalog, which gives FOT data FOT catalog that gives an overview of FOTs. We have tools catalog, and we have data catalog, where we're collecting different data sets and the content and what you can use it for. But to come back to your question about the RDE, there's nothing like that right now in Europe. The main thing is here, if you should have something like that, the data has to be anonymized, and in that sense, maybe you can provide all data, but maybe you could start providing parts of the data. I know the RDE have worked immensely about on the anonymization of data to be able to provide it.
Yeah.
And maybe we also will go in that direction. But when it comes to personal data, you can't have it through that kind of open access. And here we're working very hard on anonymization to be able to provide even video through a public access.
Thank you so much. Just a final check whether there's any question from the participants.
Hi, Bo. Just to end the meeting, we are quite close to the ending time.
Yeah.
There were a practical question if we will share the presentation. Yes, of course, we will provide the recording video of the webinar and also the presentation on the Fortinet Data website. I think that I don't have any other question. I would maybe spend the last few minutes to present a bit the next initiative of the Fortinet Data project.
Yeah, sounds good.
I have prepared a quick overview. So we will have Fortinet Data organized one stakeholder workshop during the ITS World Congress, European Congress in Glasgow. It will be on Wednesday, the 8th of June, and the title is Towards a Methodology for Field Operational Tests for Automated Vehicles. So we will explore the needs, the future needs related to the field operational test for automation. And we will also present a paper on anonymization of data from field operational tests in the section on security and privacy issue for cooperative ITS. We will have one international workshop on data sharing and reuse in field operational tests during the World Congress that will be held in October in Melbourne. And during the World Congress, we will also organize a session on the challenges for data collection and sharing in automated vehicle pilots. We have draft 2 papers that will be presented in the Congress, one on FOT project agreements and another one on the framework for FOT data and metadata description. I will end with 2 other initiatives. One is the workshop on data reuse that will be organized in September, the 14th of September in Gothenburg, Aachen and Helsinki. It will be a workshop with remote participants from 3 venues. Ivo, do you want to comment on this initiative?
No, it's just this is the event that people can attend. They don't have to go to these 3 sites physically. They can be sort of remote users and accessing this one online.
Okay, thanks. And then we will have an extra workshop that will be a kind of follow-up of the workshop that we held last year on data anonymization that will be held beginning of September in Gothenburg, but the date is still to be confirmed. All the information regarding the events of Fortinet Data are available on our website. This is the last slide. I put here some useful links. One is to the FOTN data wiki, where we have the FOT catalog, the data catalog, and the tool catalog. And then we have also an online library where we have collected all the relevant documents like scientific publication, presentation from previous workshops, and also the past webinars. So I really invite you to go to our website and to have a look to our material. And finally, you can subscribe to the FOTN Data newsflash and receive our updates and our invitation for initiatives like this webinar or workshop or other activities. With this slide, I think that we can close our meeting. I would really thank Ivo from University of Leeds and Elena Gellerman from SAFER for their participation and presentations. As I said, the webinar has been recorded, and it will be available on FOTN Data website. Thank you very much for your participation, and have a nice end of afternoon.
Yeah, just join you to thank everyone for spending time here with us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.